Let's talk a little bit about fear. Now, a single presentation is not nearly enough to get into all the details of fear. There's a lot of kinesthetic skill that's necessary to successfully work with fear cases. There's a lot of deep understanding about dog body language that's necessary to really take on, especially serious fear cases, but even mild fear cases. You should have a really strong understanding of dog body language and at least a little background on kind of how dogs communicate in the face of stress. So we'll talk about that a little bit here, but I just want to say that if you want to work with fear cases, there's a lot more education that needs to be done beyond just this. But let's talk about some foundational pieces when we're working with fear. Those foundational pieces are going to kind of be our toolkit here. So I referenced flooding in an earlier video. Flooding is just exposure to a stimulus, basically at full intensity, or at least at an intensity that's a little bit too much for that animal. The animal can't regulate on their own. They need to either be removed from the situation or they need some sort of assistance to regulate on their own to get back that heart rate, get their heart rate back down, get their respiratory rate back down. Flooding is just exposing them to that, kind of disregarding any of the rest of it. The intent of flooding is to teach the learner, the dog, um, that whatever they think is this major threat is not actually a threat. The reality is that basically every time that we go to do a study on whether or not flooding is effective, we find out that flooding is not effective, or at least not effective in the ways that we want it to be effective, or at least not as effective as other treatment protocols. What we can actually have happen when we flood is a worsening of that fear. And we can actually create a trauma response in the body, which is going to literally rewire how the brain is operating. That's why we have things like PTSD. PTSD is a biological process. It's not a human-specific sort of thing, as far as we understand. So if we are going to flood, we need to recognize that there is a pretty high chance, there's a relatively high chance of increasing that fear. So we need to be comfortable with that. And we need to set up our training scenarios so that the dog experiences both the perceived threat and a biological relief from that threat. The body, not me, not the handler, the dog's own body has to say, I think that's not actually a threat anymore. I think I'm registering that I can actually relax in the presence of the stimulus. Now we're going to get into a problem, the same problem that we got into with extinction when we're flooding. So in extinction, the behavior gets worse before it gets better. Flooding is going to trigger the same behavioral response, the same outward expression of that fear, or a similar outward expression of that fear. The fear-related behaviors are going to get worse before they get any better. And we need to consider that part of that getting worse could mean that the dog starts displaying unsafe behavior when they didn't before. Or if they're currently displaying unsafe behavior, this could exaggerate those long term. And then again, we could get spontaneous recovery events later. So just because I extinct it right now does not mean that it's not going to come back in a day, a week, a month, a year, 5 years. At some point, it can come back. So we don't want to use flooding, but I just want to highlight that flooding is very commonly used in dog training. From all that we know about how fear impacts the body on a biological level, we want to avoid flooding whenever possible. And we need to recognize that if we are choosing flooding as a treatment protocol, that we've got a relatively high risk of this going wrong. All right, this is a quote from one of my favorite textbooks. This guy right here. It is very damaged because I have referenced this quite a bit throughout my career. It's got a bunch of highlights and everything in it because I've just read through this thing so many times. It's kind of how I started my career, was reading through this textbook. In addition to scientific knowledge, a significant amount of common dog sense and creative problem solving is needed to treat canine fears and phobias successfully, making cookbook protocols quite beside the point. I love this quote. I think it encapsulates so much of dog training, and so much of what I love about dog training is that creative problem solving piece. There's not like a recipe that I can use for this. There's not a step-by-step instruction that I can do for fear. there's going to be a lot of problem solving in that. There's going to be a lot of kind of try this out and see if that works, and then try that out and see if that works. We have to have a really strong understanding, this common dog sense. We have to have a strong understanding of dog behavior and dog communication and learning theory. We have to have all of that in place so that we have room to kind of play around in that. Think of it like cooking. I've got enough cooking skill that you can hand me some ingredients and I can play around with them and come up with something. I don't have the same baking skill. Right? I need a lot more kind of rules if I'm baking something versus if I'm cooking something because I've got some foundational cooking skills, but I don't have the same foundational baking skills. Same idea with fear. So we want to be mindful of that. There's no like step-by-step instruction book that I can put together for you that would teach you 100% how to deal with fear. Now, I can give you kind of a framework to operate within, which is why there's this little handbook that is available on Amazon. This is a series of worksheets that kind of helps you work through fear. There's nothing in here specifically about this is how I treat fear because of this exact reason. It's just kind of going to get you started. Get you feeling a little bit better about what's going on here, help you understand, kind of give you tools that you need to work through the training process later. Okay, unfortunately, once fear is learned, it's probably permanent. What we're finding out, what we keep finding out about how memory works and how the brain kind of works when we start wiring it all together, is that learning just kind of builds on top of each other. It's not that I'm erasing anything, it's that I'm just building on top of it, kind of in the same way that your computer does, right? Your computer's not erasing anything, it's just kind of using that space and writing on top of it. So now I can only access what's on top. Now, the brain works kind of similarly, as far as we know about on a dog training level, at least on a dog behavior level, at least. That fear, that learning that that thing, that stimulus could be a threat is always there. It's always going to be there to a certain degree. Now, I can write new information on top of that. So I've got this one negative experience with something. I can write a bunch of new information on top of that and say you've got more experiences that tell you that it's not a threat than you have experiences that tell you that it is a threat. However, it is advantageous for me to keep myself safe and alive, to always remember or to always have access potentially to the information that that could be a threat, because one time it was a threat. So we want to be mindful that once my dog learns that something might be scary, I can tell them a bunch of information that tells them that it's probably not. But if that does end up being scary in the future, I can have a reinstatement of that fear or the behavior surrounding that fear. Now, I don't want that to be interpreted as that we shouldn't be treating for fear or that we want to um, kind of condemn dogs that are scared of something. There are plenty of dogs. There are, I mean, literally countless cases of fear that we do successfully treat. But we always kind of move forward recognizing that that dog had that experience in the first place. So if my dog is afraid of tall men with beards and hats, from that point forward, at least 99% of the experiences my dog has with tall men with hats, with beards, needs to be positive. It needs to be something that my dog enjoys or at least kind of feels neutral about. Because there's always that risk if that tall person in a beard and a hat comes walking up and grabs my dog and says, I am a threat to you, well, then that fear is going to come back. So we want to be mindful of that as we move through this training protocol. But that is not to say that we shouldn't be reducing that fear. We shouldn't be teaching our dogs new information on top of that. All right, back to this question. Why do dogs do what they do? Why do dogs do what they do? Dogs do what they do for a lot of the same reasons that we do what we do. It's all about survival, safety, comfort, agency. Those sort of things are things that just us as animals want. So when I'm looking at why this dog is exhibiting fearful behavior, lowered body language, ears back, kind of making themselves seem smaller, or the exact opposite, making myself seem bigger, making myself appear to be a threat, growling, lunging, snapping, barking, all of that can be fear. We tend to lump that in as aggression, which we'll talk about aggression a little bit more later. but we tend to lump that all together as aggression. And really, most of the time, what we perceive as aggression is really just fear. It's not every case. There are plenty of cases of offensive aggression. There are plenty of cases of predatory, basically a predatory drift or just a predatory sequence in relation to anything. Can be a predatory sequence towards children, predatory behavior towards children, predatory behavior towards squirrels, cats, whatever. So it's not to say that all aggression cases are fear, but an overwhelming majority of them are. So why does all that behavior happen? Well, all that behavior happens because it works. It keeps me safe. Or at one point in the past, it kept me safe. Let's talk about thresholds. This is one of my favorite visualizations ever. I've linked Grisha Stewart's website in the description of this. Please check out Grisha Stewart if you have any interest whatsoever in working with fear cases. Be familiar with the information that she is putting out there. She's got fantastic information available. This is from BAT, Behavior Adjustment Training, which she's got lots of great webinars about. I love it. Totally changed the way that I work with fear cases, and really gave me a lot of tools to put a lot of agency into the dog's kind of hands, into the dog's paws, letting the dog kind of make some choices during training. Totally rocked my whole foundation of that. So please check out Grisha Stewart if you're not already familiar with her. There are tons of information on her website, lots of new webinars coming out. She's really amplifying a lot of really great voices in this field through her work. So please check out her website and check out her membership and all the stuff she's putting out there. But I'm stealing this visualization directly from her just so that I can shout her out and just so that I can shout out how great everything is that she's putting out there. So you see here, this is for bat training. And actually, let me turn on my little laser pointer here. So this is the bat zone. This is, I'm gonna like really, I'm gonna like condense bat to a point that's not really fair to bat, but please check out all that information about bat. Please check that out. So basically during bat, we want to, when we're treating fear, we want to be working up here. This is where most of our training happens, is up here on the beach. So this doesn't look like the dog's reacting, right? This dog that's up here at that ideal area where I want the dog to spend most of our training session, you see the tail is relaxed. It's kind of in line with the spine. It's hanging loose. The mouth is open, tongue's out, ears are down. The dog's not looking very serious, right? There's some like relaxation happening in the face there. This is what I want for most of the time that I'm treating fear. This is below threshold. We talk about threshold a lot in dog training, and there's a lot of discussion that happens around where that threshold is. My personal bias, and I'm going based on largely going based on Grisha Stewart's work, but also work from a lot of different trainers, Patricia McConnell, Pia Silvani. I watched one of her webinars fairly early in my career, and it informed quite a bit of what I do, or what I did for a long time. I still take pieces of that as well. Lots of really great trainers doing this. Dr. Sophia Yin, I've linked her blog, some of her blog posts down in the description of this video as well. But this is where we want to work. Not down here. Down here, see this dog's tail is straight up in the air. It is trying to make myself look bigger. Hackles are probably up. That tail, if it's wagging, it's going like this, kind of that fast wag, or maybe it's going like this a little bit looser, but it's still really, really tall. The ears are up. The face is really serious. We're baring teeth. We're saying we are serious. This is not where training happens. This is over threshold. And even right here, this is over threshold. The dog's tail is coming up a little bit. The heart rate, if we had a heart rate monitor on, that heart rate is starting to increase. That respiration rate starting to increase. That mouth closes. The ears are forward. We're standing up a little bit taller. We're looking, notes up here say arousal level moderate, but is decreasing a little bit. So we're like right in, we're just past that threshold where we want to be working. So whenever possible, this is where I want to work. This is where I want to implement the tools we're going to talk about in a second: counter conditioning, habituation, desensitization. This is where that happens, not down here. Down here, we're in survival mode. Down here, when I am reacting, when I'm barking, lunging, growling, whatever, all of that is happening in a place where I'm not learning anything about the stimulus other than that it's a threat. I am in survival mode. It's my very primitive brain just kind of reacting to the situation and not consciously thinking about what's happening. So if you see trainers working in that space down there, we're working with a dog that is the dog's in fight or flight. The dog is just tapping into, or the amygdala is just kind of taking over the brain and saying, I'm going to give you a whole bunch of cortisol and adrenaline that's just going to make you get out of this as safely as possible. And this is how we're going to do it. So we work up here. This is where I want to be working. So again, please check out bat, cat, and lat. Check those out. Have those in your back pocket. I'm not going to go into those because those are not my treatment protocols, but I will happily link to those trainers down in the description of this video. Please check those out if you have any intention of working with fear. But important thing from this that I want you to take away, we do not work with dogs down here. We work with dogs up here on the beach, looking like they're doing nothing. This is where I can learn. This is where my brain is in a space where I can learn about what's going on. All right. Habituation, I always have this little fable. My source is linked in the description. It's also linked in the slide. So habituation. Habituation is just repeated exposure to a stimulus. And I'm going to read this, and I want you to think, was there a reward for the fox? In this example, is there a reward for the fox that teaches them that the lion's not scary? A very young fox who had never before seen a lion happened to meet one in the forest. A single look was enough to send the fox off at top speed for the nearest hiding place. The second time the fox saw a lion, he stopped behind a tree to look at him a moment before slinking away. But the third time, the fox went boldly up to the lion and without turning a hair, said, "Hello there, old top." Was there a reward for the fox that taught him that the lion wasn't scary? Not really. It wasn't really a reward. The reward was nothing happened, right? The first time I saw that lion, my animal brain kicked in, my reptile brain kicked in, that really early part of my brain kicked in and said, this is a threat. But then I realized I was safe. And then the next time I saw it, still a little bit nervous, and I kept my distance, but nothing happened. And the third time, because I've got this history of nothing happening, I could walk right up to it. Wasn't so scared. Was there a reward? No. Was there a reward? No, but the reward was safety. I was safe in the presence of the stimulus. Nothing bad happened. Nothing scared me. It was safe. So is there a reward? No, but yes, in that the reward is safety. Okay, another quote from that fantastic textbooks that I strongly encourage you to at least be familiar with. Check it out from your local library or request it from your local library, just so you can skim through some of the chapters that interest you. Many common fears appear to persist because the dog does not remain in the presence of the provoking situation long enough to benefit from slowly emergent opponent relief and relaxation efforts. Does that mean we should flood? Absolutely not. We've talked about that at the start of this lecture. We are not flooding. But I do want to set up my training scenarios in a way that sets my dog up to say, to question and to have the cognizance to question, am I safe right now? And realize, yes, I am safe right now. I see a lot of trainers starting to work with fear, and it's a lot of kind of like rapid fire games where we put the dog in a sit and we just start rapid firing treats at them. This is a great management solution. Gets the dog looking at me, high rate of reinforcement for looking at me in the presence of stimulus. Am I learning? Is the dog learning that that's not a threat? Not necessarily. A little bit. There's a little bit of that learning happening. It's not that there's none happening. But we need to set up a situation where the dog's allowed to see it, recognize that it's not a threat, and experience the relief that comes from nothing happening, just like the fox in the previous example. So just to emphasize really, really clearly here, your rehearsals are like our training setups. Your rehearsal must be set up to expose the dog to the fear and the relief. And it needs to be a low enough level of fear that the dog can still think, can still learn to write, learn to write, The dog can learn and write information into their brain. I want the dog to experience the fear, a little bit of fear, and then relief. That little bit of fear, I cannot stress this enough. That little bit of fear is like, hmm, hmm, not, oh no. That's a little bit too much. That's a little bit beyond threshold. Once my body has gone into fight or flight, we're beyond that threshold. All right. So habituation is just repeated exposure to a stimulus until there is a decrease in the undesired behavior, those fear-related behaviors that we deem a problem. Pro of habituation is that it's a pretty simple setup. Once we have given all this new information, remember we're just writing information on top of previous information. Once we've given a lot of information there, it's going to be hard to get through all of that unless I have like a traumatic event, but it can be hard to get through all of that. So it's pretty strong. I've given you 400 examples of this not being a threat, and you only had one that was like a mild threat. And because I've set the dog up to experience this so many times, the hope is that they will generalize that to other situations a little bit easier. I've seen 400 examples that all look slightly different. This one also looks slightly different. I think it might be just as safe as the other 400 examples. However, if I'm not pairing this successfully with desensitization protocols, we almost always pair the two of them together. That's why I keep talking about thresholds and keep talking about working under threshold. If I don't pair this with desensitization effectively enough, it's very susceptible to escape or avoidance. The dog can choose to remove themselves from it, and the dog can learn that escape is more effective than staying there. So it's really critical that we pair habituation with desensitization. I'm going to expose you to the stimulus 400 times, and every time it's going to be at a low level, and we're going to very, very slowly ramp up over the course of many, many, many repetitions. So I just referenced desensitization. Here it is. It is slowly increasing the intensity of the stimulus to decrease the response to that stimulus. So a desensitization protocol for something like approaching strangers. My first step of that is evaluating where the dog's threshold is. Once I get into my actual treatment, that might look like my dog is over here sniffing around, and 40 feet away, there's a person wandering around. A person they would normally be afraid of is wandering around over there. The dog's sniffing around a little bit. They look. Is it a threat? No, it's not a threat. I'm safe to go back to what I was doing. That's it. That's what a beautiful training session might look like for a scared dog. Not the dog barking, lunging, whoa, dog barking, lunging, losing their mind, and then the trainer kind of like forcing them to not do that anymore. That's not what a great training session looks like. A great training session looks like a bunch of boring, not a lot happening, and ideally a trainer with fantastic timing to reward those moments where the dog gives them something really exceptional there. So this can be a really slow process depending on where the dog's threshold is, depending on how low level that stimulus needs to be to not provoke a big response. This might take a while. And that can be really frustrating for owners. As dog trainers, we need to be mindful that this can be a slow and frustrating process. Just because we rationalize that, well, you're going to have to work with this for a year, and that's what you signed up for, that's not very encouraging. We'll talk about client interactions a little bit later. But I need to be mindful of that as a dog trainer. I need to be mindful that this is going to be a slow and frustrating process. And I've got to be willing to meet that person where they're at right now and say, hey, I get that this is going to be really frustrating. Let's give you some management tools to help you out in the meantime when you really need to just like, you need to get out for a walk that day and you don't have the time to slowly work through this. Let's give you some management tools to work with. So those are things like ask the dog to sit and look at you, reward them, high rate of reinforcement for being there, constant rate of reinforcement for just being there. So this also requires the ability to slowly increase the intensity of the stimulus. So for things like thunderstorms, yes, I can play the sounds of a thunderstorm at low levels in the house. That might be successful for some dogs, but I want to be fair to the dog and not expect that even if I play thunderstorm sounds really, really loudly in my house, that's not necessarily encapsulating the full experience of a thunderstorm. There's the pressure increase or decrease. I'm not a meteorologist. There's the pressure difference. There's a change in pressure. There is the rain. There's the approaching couple of days. There's the change of smells, which is huge to a dog. If you don't already know, dogs have an insanely good sense of smell. It's like 10,000 times better than ours, at least. There's so many other variables there that just the sound of the thunderstorm might not be enough. So things like thunderstorms, fireworks can be really hard to desensitize to. Um, Airplane travel can be hard to desensitize a dog to. If I'm working with like assistance dogs, it can be hard to desensitize to the airplane unless I've got like a mock airplane set up in my training room, which is I should. So I need to look at the situation and say, how much of this can I really recreate? Right. And if the answer is not very much of it, I might need to look elsewhere for my treatment. I might do a lot more counter conditioning. I might set up the environment like if we're doing thunderstorm treatment for thunderstorm phobia. I might need to set up the laundry room in my house. That's what I did for the last thunderstorm phobic dog that I had. Set up the laundry room with lots and lots and lots of blankets so that the crate in there was really well insulated from the environment. We still had a little bit too much of an emotional response to learn very much, but at least he had a safe space in the house where he could kind of remove himself and at least have some insulation from some of those factors there. All right, we're almost, not almost always, a lot of the times we're going to be pairing all three of these things together: habituation, desensitization, and counter conditioning. These are kind of our three primary tools when it comes to treating fear. The other one that I'm not going to talk about formally here is play, which I've already linked to Amy Cook, but I'm going to link to Amy Cook again. We should be incorporating some play into our fear treatments. Counter conditioning. So we talked about what conditioning is, right? Conditioning is learning. We're associating this with that. Well, counter conditioning is just countering that previous conditioning. So I'm changing the dog's mind, changing the dog what they think about this by applying the opposite conditioning. You have learned that this is a threat. I'm going to teach you that it actually predicts a bunch of cookies. I'm going to teach you that it actually predicts me playing with you. I'm going to teach you that it predicts nothing happening. This is not actually a threat to you. So if a dog fears nail trims, we feed treats while touching nails. That's part of that desensitization. And I'm going to habituate by doing this multiple times over multiple days, over multiple weeks, with multiple people, with multiple sets of trimmers. So it's not always just these trimmers. It's these trimmers too. It's these Dremels. It's this, it's that, it's the other thing. So we feed treats while touching the nails. I want to do this more or less simultaneously. So at the same time, I want to be giving treats and touching the nails. You'll hear this called open bar, closed bar sometimes. So when you're in the presence of a stimulus while touching your nails, or when you're seeing the scary person, or when the thunderstorm is present, you're getting that reward pretty much consistently. The bar is open. The second that it stops, when I take my hand away from your nails or when the person walks away, I stop giving that reward. Open bar, closed bar. I want to do this more or less simultaneously. No two things happen truly simultaneously. They're usually happening one after the other. So if we need an order there, it's stimulus and then the reward. I keep doing this because it's usually treats that we use. It's really, really accessible. And if my dog's not eating treats, they're probably a little bit too stressed to be doing this. I don't have to use treats, though. There's plenty of other things I can use. It's anything that the dog likes. We're going to use some sort of reward, some reinforcer. I'm going to say reinforcer there, but I want to remind you that reinforcement is about behavior. Conditioning, desensitization, and habituation, we're getting into the emotional response. So I'm changing the underlying emotional response. Changing that emotional response will change the behavior. Changing the emotional response will change the behavior. Right? Because that's what that behavior is. The behavior is an expression of an emotional response. The behavior is my body has told me this information, and this is what I'm doing to deal with that. This is what I'm doing in response to that. So stimulus comes in, brain processes it, send some signals to the body, and then I express some sort of behavior in response to those signals. I'm also going to link Dr. Sophia Yin's work. Fear-Free Handling is a fantastic course. I cannot encourage it strongly enough. If you're working in this field, if you're working with dogs, please get Fear-Free certified. It is, especially if you're working in like a veterinary office or an animal shelter or anything that's going to be handling dogs invasively, a groomer. Fear-Free is really, at the moment, the gold standard for handling certification. So really, really valuable. They've even got a free one. The shelter certification is free. It gives you a lot of foundational pieces for fear-free. So please check them out. I'm going to link them in the description of this video as well. Really valuable to have. And if you're a student at a college, you, especially, I think it's a veterinary, if you're in any sort of like veterinary related program, you get fear-free certified for free. Okay, and we're often pairing this, like I said, with desensitization and counter conditioning. I also want to mention with desensitization, the opposite or related to desensitization is sensitization. So sensitization is the repetition of a stimulus, and I become more and more sensitive to that stimulus. So the first time I see it, I'm like, "Ooh, that was pretty scary." The second time I see it, I'm like, "Whoa, that was really, really scary." Third time I see it, I'm terrified. The fourth time I see it at a low level, I still have a big reaction to it. I become sensitized to it. I become very sensitive to this stimulus. Desensitization, sensitization. I didn't put it in the slideshow because I'm mindful of it, but this slideshow we're talking about like tools for dealing with fear. That's more something I want to be mindful of while I'm working with fear. I'm going over with flooding. Okay, so we're looking at what are we using here? What tools are we using here in our tool belt? Well, can I slowly increase the intensity of the stimulus? If so, then I'm desensitizing. And most stimuli, most things that my dog's afraid of, 9 times out of 10, most of them I can slowly increase the intensity of it. Is it other dogs? I can go to my local football field, my local high school football field, and be at the opposite end of the football field. Maybe that's where I start. Maybe I put some visual barriers up so I can't really clearly see the other dog, just barely see the other dog. I can hear the tags moving. Maybe I start with that. People, same thing. Can I introduce the smell of the person, of some scary person's sweater or their hat? Right, put that in the environment. The dog's looking at it like, well, I don't know about that. That seems a little scary. It smells a little bit scary. Right, we put that 10 feet away. Dog gets closer. Habituation. Take the dog out. Great job. You did it. Tomorrow, we go again. Maybe get a little bit closer tomorrow. Great job. Enough. Tomorrow, again, that's that habituation and desensitization. And if I'm giving some cookies at the same time, I'm counter conditioning. So I want to slowly increase the intensity of the stimulus. Can I continuously reward in the presence of the stimulus? Most things, sure. But there's some things, like a thunderstorm, it's not reasonable to expect the dog to eat for the duration of a thunderstorm, especially if you live in the Midwest where, the thunderstorm's going to go on for a little while. It's not, it's not reasonable to be counter conditioning that entire time. Now, I might be able to introduce some other reinforcers or some other things that the dog likes. I don't necessarily have to be feeding the whole time. I can be playing a little bit. If I've got some sort of condition, some sort of secondary reinforcer, right? Like music, like calming music, that might help a little bit. That might add a little bit of that counter conditioning piece into it. And then we need to ask, can I repeatedly expose the dog to the stimulus without inducing an escape response? And if so, I'm going to habituate. Most things, 99 things out of 100, I can habituate to. And if I can't habituate to it successfully, I need to question whether or not I really need to do this in the first place. If this is something my dog will encounter 5 times in their whole entire life, let's just manage the dog. Manage the dog in that situation. Keep them away from that thing that they're scared of. Give them some space from it. All right. This is the slide that I'm going to leave us with here. This is also from textbook. Since the extinction of fear is subject to recovery, remember extinction, we're getting rid of the behaviors surrounding this. When I extinct something, I can have a spontaneous recovery event. And also, because we said that fear is probably permanent, right? It's always potentially there. My training should not just be focused on addressing the emotional response. I also have to give my dog a way to have voluntary impulse control over those behaviors. This is what gets me really, really excited. It's what I'm talking about at Expo this year. It's what I get most excited to talk to people about in regards to training, working with fear, is teaching the dog alternative behaviors, differential reinforcement of alternative behaviors that allow the dog to cope with that fear. Allow the dog to say, I feel uncomfortable. I'm not going to explode. I'm going to take some deep breaths. I'm going to nudge your leg to tell you that I'm feeling nervous. And then we're going to walk away and you're going to do some sort of calming activity with me, some sort of relaxation activity with me. That gets me really excited. Let our dogs communicate they're uncomfortable. Right? I want to tell my dog that this is not as scary as you think it is. But I also want to tell my dog, if you think that something is scary, you should let me know so we can work on it together. That's what gets me excited. That's what we're talking about in the next lecture. I'm so pumped to be getting into that kind of stuff. Um, this benefits a lot from discussion. So please join our coffee subscribers so you can get into those classrooms where we are talking about this stuff in real time, just as I would in our college classes when we talk about fear. We talk about fear a lot throughout the whole program. And then we've got kind of constant discussions about that in the future because every fear case that you take is going to look slightly differently. There's all kinds of variables there to talk about. So I love talking about it. Join us on our Zoom calls and our classroom style discussions. You can join us via coffee. I'll see you next time.